Although the timber doesn't know what tool you're using, in bowl turning there are some safeguards that you should be following, and not all tools are suitable. Here I have a 1/2 inch bowl gouge, and I'd like to start by pointing out the main parts of the bowl gouge. Firstly, we have the handle. Usually it has a long handle so you can support it against your hip and aid in the support while cutting. The shaft of the tool is constructed through a solid steel rod that goes all the way into the handle for support, and then the flute in the tool is milled out of the shaft. If we turn it over to the other side, we've got the heel of the tool, the bevel, which is used to support the cutting edge of the tool, which is doing all the work. On a bowl gouge, because the wings are swept so steep, you have a large surface that's helping to support the tool during that cutting process. But there is one tool in particular you should never use in bowl work, and that's the spindle roughing gouge. And here's why. On this sample here, I've presented the roughing gouge in its conventional manner, and if I was to rotate that, this is what would happen. It would tear out at the corner and create quite a nasty work. Similarly, if we turned it into the bowl cutting position, you can see that using the roughing gouge would mean that those wings or the tips of the tool are very close to contacting the timber. This can be quite devastating to both the timber as well as to the tool. And in a number of cases, you can even snap the tool at the tang. You should never use a roughing gouge on bowl work. So let's mount a bowl blank to the lathe and look at how we true it up before we can do all the cutting to make our fancy design. So using a mortise here to put it into the 4-jaw chuck. Finger in the centre is all that you need to make sure it aligns correctly, and tighten the jaws. Tighten it from both sides to the mechanical makeup of the chuck. Now in this particular piece of timber, I have intentionally mounted it slightly off centre. In this, it's a variable speed lathe, so always make sure the speed is turned right down before you start the lathe, and give the lathe a spin by hand to make sure you are clearing the tool rest. So using my bowl gouge, the way to orientate the bowl gouge to the timber is that if I drew an imaginary line 3mm in from the bottom edge, I rotate the tool so the top wing is lining up with that imaginary line. And if I'm rubbing the bevel, I am always keeping an unsupported part of the tool away from the timber. And a catch is caused when that unsupported tool touches the timber, and it will rotate to be supported and will always dig into your work. So let's start by truing up the rims of this bowl blank. The speed is turned down on the lathe for the safety, face mask down and hit the go button. One way of knowing when the bowl is true is when you put the tool on top of the wood blank, and if it's not vibrating, then you have trued up. So now that we've trued up the rim of the bowl, we need to true up the face. This is going to be the inside of the bowl. I'm going to be still using that imaginary line 3mm into the bottle, rolling the tool over so that I'm lining the top wing up with that imaginary line, and presenting the tool into the timber and pulling it together with my fingers until I feel no bounce. That means that particular part of the rim is now true. I can then keep advancing that in further to the middle and then do a single sweep out to the top. Or I can turn the tool over and rub the bevel and do a sweep cut into the middle. Tool height should be so that the centre of your cutting tool will line up with the centre of the piece. So you might ask, well, why are we doing that if we're going to cut all this away? Well, you need the initial truing up of the blank so that you've got a nice steady place to start rubbing your bevel for cutting the inside of the bowl. Now, one of the pleasures of doing turning is when your tools are sharp and you get these fine shavings coming off your tool. Very nice. So now we've got the trued face. I have somewhere that allows me to guide the tool correctly to start shaping the inside of the bowl. In doing that, the tool presentation can become quite important. If I have the tool like this to try and do it, it can skip out as it's coming across the bevel. The ways to help eliminate that are to come all the way around so that the bevel is at 90 degrees to the timber. Or, my preference, is to just rest it there and bring it slightly so I have a little groove that the bevel will ride in. I mentioned before that the easiest way to determine the cut was to have the imaginary 3mm line across the bottom, that I'm rotating the tool so the top wing is lining with that, and then I'm rubbing the bevel against the timber. In that orientation, if you have a nice piece of timber where you can take a deep cut, all you need to do is swing the tool towards the centre of the lathe. If you want a finer cut, you can just bring the tool further away, the tool handle away from the centre of the lathe. Let's show that. When you're getting to the centre of the lathe, and this might be more obvious in a little while, you can get a lot of tear out if you just bring the tool through. So my preference is, as I'm coming towards the centre, I'll drop my rear hand so that the tool guide comes above the centre and then sweep it down into the centre. And I'll get a far better cut across the centre of the piece doing that. There is the centre. This timber is not real obvious, but there is tear out in there because I came straight through. Let's come down and see if it makes a difference. Yep, no tear out. So in doing the final cut, I let it sweep in and I put basically no pressure whatsoever on the tool and let it guide itself through the bevel rubbing all the way into the middle, and once again you end up with these lovely shavings coming off. Beautiful work. Thank you for watching. In the next video we'll talk about scrapers and how they can be used to get rid of the fine little grooves that you can end up with your bowl gouge. And remember, wood turning is a craft where the finished product is what you leave behind.